The air inside Borgo Panigale that morning felt different, thicker, electric, almost alive, as if the factory itself sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. MAURO GRASSILLI, Ducati's sporting director, had seen legends rise and fade beneath the neon hum of data screens, but nothing prepared him for what he witnessed that day, a rider who didn't seem to control the bike but communed with it. Marc Márquez's telemetry told an impossible truth. Throttle modulation at 93% consistency under rain, lateral grip recovery 5 milliseconds before the sensors even predicted it. "I'm really sorry for Jorge Martin, but," Grassilli whispered, his words dissolving into the metallic silence of the control room. It wasn't pity, it was shock, and the faint awareness that Ducati had just rewritten its own code. The GP25's algorithms bent around Márquez's instincts like gravity around a star, and the engineers watching the data realized they were no longer refining a machine. They were trying to understand a new species of control. How could a human anticipate friction before physics allowed it? How could calm hands translate chaos into stability at 350 kilometers per hour? Each frame of onboard footage looked less like racing and more like a language never spoken before. The red lights of the dashboard flickered, the sensors hummed, and Grassilli's pulse aligned with the RPM curve as he watched the unimaginable unfold. Marc's body whispering instructions the software couldn't compute. The moment he crossed the line, Grassilli knew speed had ceased to be Ducati's obsession. Understanding had replaced dominance. And in that breathtaking collision between data and destiny, one truth became impossible to ignore. Sometimes, genius doesn't break limits. It rewrites them. And that was the moment Grassilli realized the real race wasn't on the circuit anymore. It was inside Ducati's walls, where one impossible choice was about to split the factory's soul in two. The corridors of Borgo Panigale echoed with the low hum of compressors and unspoken questions as MAURO GRASSILLI walked past the wind tunnel room, his mind heavier than the air it measured. He had spent 3 seasons shaping Jorge Martin into a champion, building telemetry files like sacred texts. Yet the boardroom that morning smelled of metal and finality. Ducati's choice was no longer about tenths of a second. It was about identity. Grassilli's voice trembled when he said, "I had started an important journey with Jorge Martin, but it was Ducati who made the choice." The words stayed suspended, like oil droplets refusing to mix with water. He knew it was coming. Marc Márquez, the anomaly, the man whose intuition could read grip through vibration alone. The technicians whispered about data overlays showing how his corner entry pressure modulated at 1.8 bars more sensitivity than anyone on the grid. "Do we really know what we're summoning?" he thought, hearing his own pulse beat against the fluorescent silence. Contracts shifted across the table like chess pieces deciding destiny. When the pen touched the paper, the air seemed to lose oxygen. Outside, the Desmosedici test bench screamed, unaware that it had just inherited a new soul. Grassilli felt the vibration travel through the floor into his shoes, as if the factory itself was warning him of change. The choice tore through alliances. Martin's eyes later, glassy and distant, carried the quiet of a man replaced not by speed but by revolution. Engineers exchanged cautious smiles that looked like apologies. Ducati's DNA was mutating, cell by carbon cell. The decision wasn't a victory. It was a controlled detonation in the heart of tradition. Somewhere, in the sterile light, the monitors flickered with Márquez's name beside the crimson code of the GP25, and Grassilli realized this was not recruitment but reincarnation. It was about who could change everything, he murmured, almost to himself, as if trying to believe that evolution was worth the wound. The factory clock struck noon, dividing the past from the future with surgical precision, and in that metallic echo, MotoGP's next era began. The box smelled of hot carbon and coffee when Márquez returned, visor lifted, eyes still scanning invisible lines only he could see. He didn't remove his gloves, he needed to feel the bike through them, as if warmth preserved data. Grassilli stood behind the engineers, watching numbers bleed across monitors like nervous constellations. "In all my years at Ducati, I've never seen anyone stay so humble after such an important victory," he whispered, half awe, half disbelief. Márquez ignored the applause outside. His focus was locked on the minute dip of torque around turn 11. He leaned forward and traced it on the screen, asking softly why the rear swing arm compressed 2.3 millimeters more than predicted under deceleration. The room froze. If I can understand her heartbeat, I can make her breathe faster, he thought, his mind speaking in RPM and instinct. He wasn't searching for control, but communion. The others talked of performance. He talked of dialogue. A mechanic compared his precision to poetry typed in grease. There was no showmanship, no arrogance, only that strange calm of a man surprised by his own clarity. The GP25 under his hand seemed alive, like a cello resonating to the exact vibration of his pulse. Grassilli realized that Ducati's data room had become a confessional. Every click of telemetry felt like a prayer for perfection, and Márquez listened as if faith could be measured in milliseconds. There was no triumphalism, only the wonder of a man still amazed by what he can do. Outside, rain tapped the paddock tents, counting seconds of reverence. Inside, the champion scribbled notes about brake temperature decay during high humidity laps, a detail too small for most but vital to him. When he finally exhaled, the team understood that curiosity had replaced authority. In that silence of screens cooling down, Grassilli felt the world tilt toward discovery, and the hum of the server racks sounded like the heartbeat of evolution. When the checkered flag fell over sack centering, Marc Márquez didn't lift his arms. He simply exhaled, as if victory were oxygen finally released. The cameras waited for a pose, but he walked toward his team instead, helmet still on, heart still racing. Each mechanic received a handshake, the kind that lingers longer than protocol allows. "Without you, I'm nothing," he said, and the sentence carried more voltage than the ignition coil of the GP25. Grassilli watched, struck by the way greatness could sound so ordinary. There was no stage, no spotlight, only fluorescent light flickering against sweat-streaked faces. A telemetry intern, trembling, later admitted that Marc remembered his name after one meeting. The champion smiled and pointed to the data logger, asking if the traction control delta at corner exit could be reduced by 0.05 seconds to preserve tire consistency over 28 laps. "They think I lead them, but they're the ones keeping me upright," he thought, wiping his visor. Leadership in that box wasn't a crown, it was a current. When a leader doesn't look down at you but reaches out a hand, even the last person in the team feels like the first. Grassilli murmured to himself, realizing the factory had found its heartbeat again. Every morning since, the ritual repeats, Márquez entering early, coffee in one hand, greeting everyone with the same two words, "Good morning, champion." The phrase travels through the garage like a tuning fork, aligning frequencies of effort and faith. Mechanics arrive earlier now, tightening bolts with a different gravity. Humility has become the software update running silently beneath every task. The GP25 gleams under neon light, its carbon skin reflecting faces that finally believe in themselves. Gratitude has replaced pressure, belonging the new fuel. Grassilli sees it in their eyes. No one works for Márquez anymore, they work with him. And in that shared pulse between man and machine, Ducati's true power quietly ignites. Inside the Ducati laboratory, the GP25 rested like a sleeping animal under the white glare of halogen lights, every cable connected to a monitor that pulsed with equations instead of heartbeats. Márquez approached it without drama, tracing a finger along the carbon fairing as if reading Braille. Grassilli observed from the corner, realizing that what separated Marc from everyone else was not aggression but interpretation. "His questions are those of an engineer, not a rider," one technician whispered, watching him dissect telemetry like a surgeon reading poetry. He could sense aerodynamic pressure variations that the sensors recorded as 0.08 kilopascals, a margin invisible to human instinct, yet clear to him. "If I can teach her to trust me, she'll reveal her secrets," he thought, feeling the vibration of the cooling fans. He spoke to the engineers about rear swing arm compression during high-load transitions and how the brake fluid expanded 0.2 degrees above tolerance after turn 11. He doesn't ask to prove he knows, he asks because he truly wants to understand, Grassilli repeated to the Japanese delegate from Magneti Marelli. Together they developed a new engine brake map that recovered 1/10 of a second per lap, a discovery born not from genius but from patience. The factory air smelled of ozone and ambition. Márquez rode the prototype the next morning, describing the front feedback as softer, like snow compressing beneath the boot. It was an odd image, yet the data confirmed improved vertical compliance. For the first time, Ducati's engineers felt they were conversing with intuition itself. The GP25 began responding to him like a living thing, its traction algorithm adjusting almost before he touched the throttle. "You only see him on Sunday," Grassilli said, "but we see him on Monday, and that's when you understand who a true champion is." By mid-season, the bike's stiffness index dropped by 3%, a microtuning invisible to fans but transformative in rhythm. Marc didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, his silence full of equations. The garage no longer sounded mechanical. It breathed. The GP25 had been rewritten from inside its own soul, and Ducati knew it had witnessed evolution coded in human form. The clouds above Motegi were the color of old titanium, heavy and unpredictable, breathing rain in uneven size. Márquez sat on the grid, visor fogged, reading the surface like a mathematician reading a heartbeat. The radar said chaos, but instinct whispered rhythm. Every team prepared the intermediate tires. Only his stand remained still. "We're staying on slicks," he said, voice calm as if discussing weather, not destiny. The mechanics hesitated, glancing toward Grassilli, who nodded because he'd learned that logic sometimes kneels before intuition. The lights went out, and the first lap felt like skating on whispers. Water streaked the camera lenses, but the number 93 machine stayed upright, feeding torque with microscopic precision, maintaining tire temperature at 84 degrees Celsius when others had already cooled to despair. "Trust her, she's speaking through the vibration," he thought, shifting weight as if in conversation with gravity. By mid-race, the asphalt began to dry in trembling patterns, and the GP25 sliced through the mist like a thought gaining confidence. He won not through dominance but through dialogue. "We chose the right risk," he told the press later, placing credit in plural, never singular. Grassilli remembered how far he'd come from Jerez 2020, when broken bone and silence had erased his reflection. "I wasn't myself anymore, just a body that remembered what it used to do," Marc had confessed. The man who once fought machines had learned to listen to them. "We're the ones who must adapt, not the bike," he'd repeated during those slow months of reconstruction. In Misano, alone in the rain, he had whispered to the Ducati, "If you want, I'm here," as though forgiveness could start an engine. That night, the relationship between man and metal was rewritten. "It's strange," he later said, "but now when I lose, I feel the race more alive." At Motegi, under the hiss of soft rain, the sentence became prophecy. The GP25 crossed the line, steam rising from its belly pan like breath from a creature reborn, and the paddock finally understood that courage is simply faith with throttle. In the dim morning light of Borgo Panigale, the Ducati box wakes like a living organism rather than a workplace. The compressors breathe, laptops blink, and the scent of heated rubber lingers like incense in a mechanical chapel. Engineers arrive earlier now, driven not by fear but by belonging. Marc Márquez moves among them quietly, coffee in hand, repeating the phrase that has become ritual, "Good morning, champion." Grassilli calls it a simple greeting, yet it carries voltage through the veins of the team. A telemetrist once said he could feel the atmosphere shift by 2 decibels of silence when Marc entered the room. During debriefs, hierarchy dissolves into dialogue. "I forced it." Period, he admits without hesitation after a risky braking miscalculation in turn 7. The data shows front-end pressure spiking to 7.1 bars, too high, too human. "They must see that I'm fallible, so they'll trust the process, not the myth," he thinks while tracing a line across the telemetry screen. When the numbers turn green again, he redirects praise like light through glass. "It's not my merit, it's yours." His humility recalibrates ambition. Even errors become fertile ground. At Motegi, his refusal to pit in chaos became legend, sealed with the words, "We took the right risk." Later, after defeating Bagnaia by half a breath, he clasped his rival's shoulder. "Great race, brother. You were just 1 lap short." Bagnaia would later confess, "He never made me feel lesser, not even when my fall became his rise." In a paddock where ego usually fuels engines, respect became Ducati's hidden horsepower. The GP25's telemetry now records more than speed. It captures harmony, translated through data curves that resemble empathy. Grassilli watches from behind the glass, realizing he no longer manages a team but conducts an orchestra. Every mechanic, every engineer, every intern plays in tune with the same unspoken rhythm. And in that collective heartbeat, Ducati discovers that humanity, when synchronized, is the fastest algorithm on Earth. Under the floodlights of Misano 2024, Marc Márquez sat alone on the pit wall, his right arm trembling slightly beneath the sleeve of his suit. 4 years earlier at Jerez, that same arm had shattered like porcelain under too much destiny. Doctors called it mechanical fatigue. He called it a dialogue interrupted. The sleepless nights that followed were not haunted by pain, but by absence. "If I can learn to feel again, maybe I can race again," he told himself in the cold echo of hospital corridors. When he finally whispered to the GP24, "If you want, I'm here," the phrase wasn't superstition, it was surrender to a shared rebirth. From that moment, he began to rebuild trust not only in the bike but in the people who touched it. Grassilli saw the metamorphosis take hold like dawn creeping through steel shutters. "We are a perfectly synchronized human machine," he declared after the first winter test, watching data traces merge like harmonies. Under Marc's influence, today Ducati isn't just a winning bike, it's a team that trusts. The engineers started treating telemetry not as cold numbers, but as dialogue between pulse and piston. During a Mugello session, a subtle sensor lag of 0.06 seconds revealed a wiring flaw. Marc noticed it by feel before software did. His intuition had turned tactile. Every intern began to believe that small gestures mattered, tightening a bolt, cleaning a visor, because every engineer works with more care, every intern feels important. Every detail has a meaning. Even after defeat, laughter replaced tension. For the first time, even after defeat, there are smiles in the garage. Humility had become contagious, spreading faster than horsepower. The factory now moved like a coral reef, different organisms breathing as one, silent yet alive. Maybe redemption isn't speed, but alignment, he thought during a late debrief, eyes fixed on the flickering telemetry line that mirrors heartbeat. Grassilli finally understood that Ducati's revival was not mechanical, but spiritual. True greatness doesn't demand attention. It walks in silence and transforms everything it touches. And as the lights of the circuit dimmed, that silence roared louder than victory itself. By 2025, Ducati no longer measures itself by speed alone. It breathes, thinks, and feels like a living organism reborn through discipline and wonder. The numbers say 8 podiums out of 9 races, yet the truest data hides between the heartbeats of its people. Márquez has turned telemetry into empathy, converting decimals into devotion. "We didn't just hire a champion. We found a man who made everyone around him great," Grassilli says, still astonished that humanity became a competitive advantage. In the garage, torque maps glow beside photographs of laughter. Engineers whisper that his throttle trace is smoother by 3% during stress laps, a metric that somehow feels like kindness translated into code. What if this is what perfection really means, Marc wonders, to make precision feel human? After Sachsenring, when the crowd had vanished into drizzle, Grassilli sat next to him on the pit wall, 2 silhouettes stitched to the horizon. "You know you've changed them all, right?" he asked quietly. Marc smiled, shaking his head. "I didn't change anyone. I just helped them see how much they're worth." Around them, the cooling GP25 ticked like a clock, remembering every second of effort. Across the paddock, rivals began adopting his rituals. Longer debriefs, softer words, shared credit. With Marc, you always feel the need to give your best. Even when you lose, Bagnaia admitted, pride softened into respect. When Yamaha dispatched analysts to decode the so-called Márquez method, they didn't find a method, they found a mentality. The revelation rippled through the championship like a quiet revolution. Grassilli realized that Ducati's victory was no longer confined to lap charts, but engraved in character. What Marc taught us isn't in a data pack, it's in the way you look at yourself after giving everything. A technician later noted a tiny pattern in post-race thermal graphs, reduced engine strain during team celebrations, proof that harmony can cool metal. Perhaps emotion has its own aerodynamics, Marc thought, feeling the stillness between engines. And in MotoGP, that's worth more than any world title. The sentence hung in the humid air of Borgo Panigale, glowing like a soft red warning that greatness, once humanized, never fades.